Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to PACS at 35. So for today's panel, we will be listening to Philippines-China relations in times of crisis. We have today 4 speakers, each of which will be discussing a certain topic underneath the broader theme of Philippines-China relations, especially during times of crisis. So with that, I would like to invite our first speaker. Sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties. Okay, so our first speaker is Dr. Lina Kong. She is a research fellow with the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Program at the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies at the S. Rahatratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS, Nanyang Technological University. Her research interests are in humanitarian affairs, non-traditional security studies in East Asia, China-Southeast Asia relations, and global governance. She has published journal articles and book chapters on humanitarian affairs, China's involvement in global governance, and non-traditional security in East Asia. Some of her recent publications include Humanitarianism in the Asia Pacific, Engage the Debate in Policy and Practice, co-edited with Alistair Cook, and China's Disaster Diplomacy in Southeast Asia in China Review. So with that, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Mina Kong for her presentation. Dr. Kong, you may proceed.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join the panel this morning to discuss this very timely and important topic. It is important for the world as well as China-Southeast Asia relations and China's bilateral relations with the Philippines. Before I start, I would like to give my thanks to Rumel for inviting me to join this important session. And I would also like to thank Mr. Dizon for organizing and liaising with me. It's a great pleasure to join a panel of important or outstanding scholars in the Philippines looking at China, Southeast Asia, or China, the Philippine relations. I believe I may set the stage for the discussion today, because I'm going to discuss China's approach to disaster diplomacy in general, as well as in Southeast Asia and in the context of China-Philippine relations. So my presentation largely consists of 3 parts or 3 components. First is China's overall approach to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And the second part will be on China and ASEAN in cooperation in this area. And the third part will be the bilateral engagement between China and the Philippines and the challenges and opportunities for further cooperation. Before I proceed to the specific components, I'd like to first define the concepts, the key concepts I'm going to discuss. So what is disaster? What is disaster diplomacy in my discussion? Of course, I believe there are different ways to define these concepts. In my studies, I tend to define disaster as an event that significantly disrupts the functioning of a society or a community. And usually the scale or the implications or the damages caused by these kind of events are too large, too significant, that are beyond the ability of the affected community and or the society to cope with. As a result, external assistance is needed. And in that context, so we have seen a lot of diplomatic efforts or initiatives going on, and people frame it in different ways. There are humanitarian disaster, humanitarian diplomacy, disaster diplomacy. I decided to choose disaster diplomacy to represent the content I'd like to express, because I believe disaster diplomacy refers to diplomatic processes and activities that are categorized or catalyzed by disasters and lead to dialogue and cooperation between different stakeholders and partners involved in this process. Usually it can be, it's between the states, but we often see the involvement of international organizations such as the UN or regional organizations like ASEAN, or also international non-governmental organizations, as there are a lot of international humanitarian organization delivering assistance to the Philippines during disasters. I believe our colleagues here are quite familiar with that. And I would like to add one more point to my definition of disasters. Normally, we understand disaster as or equal disaster with natural hazards, because in this region, we are most prone to these type of disruptions. Actually, I prefer to use this term in its broad sense, which means it can be natural hazards, it can be public health emergencies like what we are experiencing at the moment, the pandemic, or it can be technological hazards or problems such as the one happened in Japan, the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. It's a cascading disasters that involve a lot of causes. So these are the two concepts that are key to my discussion today. And I believe later our colleagues will discuss different crises or disasters and how these two countries can cooperate or have cooperated. Then I'd like to go to an overview of China's disaster diplomacy. So generally, disaster cooperation in China's foreign policy, I would like to group them into two phases or divide them into two phases. One is, I believe, before 2010 or before President Xi Jinping came to power, because in that period, China's the focus of China's diplomacy, I believe, was on economic cooperation, trade ties. And as China positioned itself, it is still a developing country. It will contribute in commensurate with its capacity. So in that context, China's engagement and contribution was limited.
Kong?
Yes.
Yes. I think your PPT is not being shared.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
Sorry. There you
Okay,
go.
thank you for
Okay.
letting me know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and here is an overview. So as I mentioned, I believe there are two phases. One is when disaster cooperation or disaster diplomacy or even foreign aid in general was on the periphery of China's external relations or its international involvement. And as China has become more resourceful and aim to gain a better, to build even more a better image or more benign image, China started to pay more attention to its aid program. So in recent years, it gained more and more attention, as I will mention later. There are more details coming after these slides. And what are the key features of China's approach to disaster diplomacy and foreign aid in general? So the major feature or a key feature in my view is state centricity. So the state plays a dominant or even for most of the time, the only role in providing aid in many cases. And the second one is the preference for bilateral channel over multilateral channel. In many cases, we will see China providing aid to countries directly to the government of the affected country. But of course, China also engage in multilateral cooperation and cooperate with multilateral organizations like the UN or ASEAN. But I believe, as in many other cases or for all countries, branding or recognition is very important and is always a issue you need to balance. And the third one is the focus of China's activities or efforts on non-conflict settings, like natural hazards or famine or food crisis, or public health emergencies, as we have seen in the past 2 years, during which China has been very active in providing vaccines, medical equipment, supplies, etc. So these are the three key features I observe. And here are some more details about like what are the priorities of China's disaster diplomacy and foreign aid. These are the data I collected from the UN system, and these are how China distributes its donations to different UN agencies. As we can see, World Food Program receive the majority of the aid. I believe it's about 60 to 70%. And then it's the second one is the World Health Organization, accounting for about 20 to 30%. And then it's UNHCR, SERV, IOM. And so food and health issues are prioritized in China's foreign aid and its engagement in disaster or crisis scenarios. And according to my research, I believe China made over 50 donations to World Food Programs in the past since 2000 or 2002. And then out of the 50 plus donations, at least about 40 were directed to situations or emergencies caused by natural hazards. Only about 10 plus were directed to conflict situations. And this is another way of dividing or examining the distribution of China's aid. I believe our colleagues are aware of the South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund sponsored by China. And here is the key numbers related to crisis time. And we can see how China sponsored different projects or different sectors. So China, 37.89% of the funds were directed to projects related to agriculture development and food security. And post-disaster reconstruction receive about 7%. Migrant and refugee protection receive 5.27%. This, according to my previous research, was a recent development because China made just 1 or 2 donations to UNHCR in the whole decade of the 2000s, and after the since 2013, China started to make more donations or contributions to this issue area. And especially after 2017, when China had its first BRI forum. Before the forum was convened in May, President Xi Jinping visited Geneva and made a speech, which explicitly stated China's commitment or interest to increase its commitment to issues, to efforts to solve the migrant crisis or the refugee situation around the world. And then public health emergency response received only 2.87%, but I believe these didn't take into consideration of the pandemic outbreak after 2020. And so we have seen a significant or notable increase in China's contribution of financial supports for humanitarian affairs and disaster relief. But overall, the level of China's contribution, at least according to publicly available data, it's still quite modest. For example, in 2017, we saw the highest number of Chinese annual donations in years, but overall it only accounted for about 1% of the global humanitarian spending in 2017. So China is an emerging donor, is an important actor and player in some issues and some regions, but its funding contribution still lags behind the major donors. And what are the new trends in China's disaster diplomacy? According to the documents released by the Chinese government in the past 1 or 2 years, serving the BRI is a key objective or goal of China's foreign aid. And I believe disaster diplomacy is categorized under these foreign aid provision efforts. So the second trend is, of course, substantive increases in funding, as I mentioned earlier. The major one is the South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund. I believe, between 2015 and 2017, China made about 3 billion to contribution to this fund. And apart from that, China also sponsors UN initiatives called Peace and Development Fund, or a title similar to this. So it's a signal of China's greater interest and commitment to these areas. And the second development second trend I observe is the institutional adjustment or reform to support China's more active role in these areas. So in 2018, China established its Central Aid Agency, CITCA. It also reformed its disaster management system. Now it has a designated Ministry of Emergency Management that's deal with disasters within China, and also is a line ministry for China's disaster cooperation with other countries and organizations. And China last year or earlier, I believe it's last year, China also issued the guidelines on the administration of foreign aid, and it also reformed the process of its how the embassy of Chinese embassies report its aid projects. Previously, these authority or these tasks was assigned to the office or of the component in charge of investment, business relations, and all that. And now it's directly managed by the embassy. So in my observation, it's an important signal of shifting away from the primary focus on economic relations. And the next trend will be the broader scope of engagement. As I mentioned earlier, we have seen China's increased the support for conflict settings for the refugee issues. Although I believe it is still sensitive, and China still take a very cautious and careful approach to these kind of issues in conflict settings, but overall its involvement has been broadened and expanded. And the last trend I observe is a greater diversity of actors. We have seen the active role of Chinese businesses in providing emergency relief aids to countries affected either by natural hazards or during COVID. We have seen many Chinese enterprises also providing equipment, medical supplies, and vaccines. Or the chamber Sanghui also plays a quite active role. And I believe the active role of the businesses is partly because China doesn't have a quite strong China's civil society groups still do not have the capacity to operate consistently or in the longer term in overseas context. But for businesses, since they are running or operating in those countries, so it's more convenient. They have the channels, they have the network, and so it's more convenient for them to assume this non-state role in China's disaster diplomacy and foreign aids. And so what are the major issues? Although I believe the reliance on the state-state channel makes sense in many cases, in many ways, but it has its weaknesses, or there are gaps that can be filled in different ways. So first, we have seen China largely partner with the UN in terms of project implementation. So the UN system or the UN agencies are the major or primary recipients of the SSCAF projects. And China still has limited engagement with international non-governmental NGOs. Currently, according to my conversations with humanitarian practitioners based across the world, it is not easy to apply for funds from the SSCAF projects, which is a major scheme of China's foreign aid. But a good positive development is that in the latest guidelines on Chinese foreign aid, there were mention about providing financial support for civil society in disaster relief or other or developmental issues. So I believe there is a recognition there, and the recognition is developing and growing. And another point is the small role of China's civil society. Actually, after Wenchuan earthquake in 2008, China has seen the growth of civil society's involvement in disaster relief in China. But later, because China has the states or the official capacity has improved significantly, so the space left for civil society or non-state actor was shrinking. So now the number of active civil society groups in disaster relief, I believe is not very big. So it is still challenging for them to respond to disasters overseas. And although state-to-state channel has many benefits, but we have to admit that it's vulnerable to geopolitics. It's affected or can be affected by the state of the bilateral relations or the relations with the region. So this is another point I observe. And beyond, apart from that, as an emerging donor, China still lacks the overseas facilities or infrastructure to support its expanding role or its expanding aid program overseas. As for example, Japan has a warehouse in ASEAN. I believe it's based in Singapore. So when there are disasters happening in this region, they can react very fast. Well, in the case of China, if they send aid from Beijing, it takes longer, but of course they can mobilize locally. That's why I believe localization and the recognition of the importance of local organizations are important. And then China-ASEAN engaged in disaster relief quite early, since the 1990s ASEAN Regional Forum. That was mostly for trust building. And then it comes to ASEAN plus China, so only ASEAN and China. Since the Indian Ocean tsunami, there were workshops, there were events, there were capacity buildings in the 2000s. And China-ASEAN signed a memorandum of cooperation in 2014. It includes provisions about supporting ASEAN's capacity building, supporting the AHA Center. However, due to various reasons, the pledged fund was not dispersed within the term of the contract. But the cooperation has been ongoing. So last year, China and ASEAN agreed to establish this ACDM plus China mechanism. The purpose is to enhance cooperation and enhance dialogues for the two sides to develop better understanding of what the other side wants, what the other side need, and how the other side, one side can provide assistance. So ACDM is a decision-making body of ASEAN in terms of disaster management policies. So between China and the Philippine cooperation, so we can see there are needs in the Philippines for international cooperation in disaster management. And from the side of China, we can see the continued prioritization of disaster management in China's foreign aid, although they started to pay more attention to refugee issues. Then in terms of the areas or the types of disasters, the two sides can cooperate. There are natural hazards and the ongoing pandemic. I believe as China grow more and more savvy, more experienced in responding to other countries' emergency situations, maybe this kind of cooperation can be extended to other types of emergencies. And of capacity building has been ongoing in the context of ASEAN, and I believe in bilateral channel as well. And there are also opportunities for exchange of experience. It's not just one side, like China share its experience, and the Philippines, with so rich experience in dealing with disaster at the community level, has also a lot to share. So I believe a community engagement can be a potential area, entry point for further cooperation or to deepen the bilateral cooperation in disaster issues. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Dr. Lina Kong, for that presentation about China's aid program, specifically on different disasters around the world. Okay, so now we move to another presentation So allow me to introduce Dr. Tan Cho Chiong. Dr. Tan Cho Chiong is a neurologist and psychologist. He is also an associate professor in the Institute of Medicine, as well as the head of the psychiatry section of the Department of Medicine of the Far Eastern University, Dr. Nicanor Reyes Medical Foundation, Manila. He is also the head of the psychiatry section of the Metropolitan Medical Center. Dr. Tan Cho Chiong is also the president of the Mga Gawa NGO and the Philippine Academy of Acupuncture. He is also an advisor to the Global Alliance of Mental Health Advocates Advisory Panel and has membership in various organizations concerned with mental health and medicine. Currently, he is also a board member of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies. Dr. Tan, you may proceed.
EG, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Tan. You may share your screen.
Thank you, EG, for your very kind introduction. I'm happy to be here to discuss the topic on health. So, do you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet, Dr. Tan.
Do you see it now or you don't?
Not yet. It's not yet
not yet.
shared.
Oh, not yet. No, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Do you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes, Dr. Tan.
Oh yeah. So my topic today will be about health security and wellness during pandemic, during COVID pandemic. In the saying Chinese, 患难见真情. In crisis, we see and feel the genuine kindness and compassion of a true friendship. And in hardship and disasters, we are in the same boat. These two verses describe the intimate relationship between Philippines and China, Filipinos and Chinese, and Filipinos and Chino, especially in this COVID crisis. In late 2019, okay, there we have a start of the COVID infection, and this spread worldwide. Our country started to feel it in early 2020. So at this time, China was the first country being affected. At this time, the Philippine government sent donations and medical equipment to China to show our care and concern to China. Okay, and this leads us to think about way back about 80 years ago. The Philippines, our country, also donated vaccines which were produced in Alabang, okay, under the supervision of the University of the Philippines to China. Okay. So in early 2020, China donated high flow equipment to the Philippines to help us with our COVID crisis. So, and also China donated. China already provided almost 60 million of doses of Sinovac to our country. So this shows that China has a great contribution in the vaccination and also in the control of COVID in our country. Okay, so with that one, we are already approaching the 100 million goal of vaccination. In March of 2020, President Duterte declared the total lockdown. Okay, in the hope to control the spread of COVID. However, the search was continuous. Okay, so at this critical moment, the Chinese government sent a team of medical experts to our country to help us with the medical treatment. Okay, so these experts with our Philippine counterparts and the DOH, and they met people from University of the Philippines, from the infectious center, and also other big medical center like Philippine General Hospital, Chinese General, Metropolitan, and other hospitals. Okay. So this is a picture of their meetings. Okay. So, and then also, in addition to offering and on having medical exchanges, okay, they also provide PPEs and other equipments to help us in our fight against COVID. Okay. So the important outputs of the visiting team will be one, sharing of the medical knowledge and experiences, two, donation and the sharing of the practical use of Lianhua, Qingwen, okay, and also the use of acupuncture in the treatment of COVID based on the recommendation of the World Association of Acupuncture and Moxibustion. The PACS is a Philippine Institute of Traditional and Alternative Healthcare. This is an agency under the Department of Health, and this is the institute is involved or in charge of promoting traditional medicine as part of the healthcare system of our country. So in early, I think around March or April 2020, the PACS under the leadership of Dr. Annabel De Guzman convened a meeting through a telephone conference to talk about the use of TCM or traditional Chinese medicine in COVID, and that they even come up with the position paper on the use of suop or steam inhalation as part of the supportive therapy of COVID. So the PACS invited experts like Sister Dr. Liu and Dr. Cheng to talk about traditional Chinese medicine. And the PACS also actively promoted the use of Lianhua, and the Lianhua was approved by the FDA as part of the supportive therapy in the treatment of COVID. Okay, and there are clinical studies both in the Philippines and in China and also in abroad, showing the efficacy of Lianhua as part of the therapy of COVID. Okay, and also acupuncture is also being promoted by our very own DOH and PACS. So the former Secretary General of PACS, Dr. Alfonso Lagaya, and former Secretary of Health, Dr. Jimmy Galveston, they practice acupuncture and other traditional medicine. So we have the guidelines of the use of acupuncture in the treatment of COVID. Philippine Academy of Acupuncture also in response to the crisis of COVID and also in support for DOH, the Philippine Academy of Acupuncture organized a series of 4 lectures about the use of acupuncture in the different stages of COVID, in the early phase, in the acute phase, and also in the recovery phase. And then the Philippine Academy of Acupuncture also organized a series of webinars, and this was highlighted by the convention, where in different topics, different aspects of COVID infection were being treated by acupuncture. The Philippine Association of Chinese Studies also takes an active role in the fight against COVID. Under the leadership of Professor Romel Banlawi, in May 2020, the PACS organized with the coordination of Dr. Teresa Carino, we we coordinated with the Amity Foundation of China and the Nanjing University, and also other NGOs like CAISA, Philippine Academy of Acupuncture, Filipino Chinese Friendship Association. They talk about the discussion about the use of acupuncture in COVID. And also in other two webinars, we invited experts to talk about the use of acupuncture and traditional medicine in COVID. Okay? And they're saying that COVID-19 is not just an infection, or it's not just a pandemic of infectious disease, it's also a pandemic of mental health. So the Institute of Confucius Institute of Ateneo University organized with two webinars. One is on the mental health in time of COVID crisis, and also another is the lifestyle, healthy lifestyle in COVID crisis. So these two topics are very relevant in the threat management of COVID. Okay? And under the leadership of Dr. Palanca and Dr. Yang, the Confucius Institute is now arranging with Sun Yat-sen University to further upgrade the DCM educational program in our country. And the Chinese General Hospital and Medical Center, under the leadership of Dr. Samuel Ang and Nelson Lim, and with Dr. Regina Talavera and Chito Guzman as prime mover, they organized last year. They established a department of traditional Chinese medicine. Okay? They together with Taiwan, with Hualien in Taiwan, they organized a series of webinars on the use of acupuncture and TCM in the treatment of COVID-19. They also distributed herbal tea, Qingxi herbal tea, free of charge to the staff and to the public free of charge. And again, in Federation of Filipino Chinese Chamber of Commerce, under the leadership of Dr. Henry Lim, they also distributed free of charge the Lianhua and also other medical assistance to the public. And CAISA is also very active in coordination with other NGOs. Okay? They distributed PPE, Lianhua under herbal teas, and also they organized webinars using traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture as part of the therapy of COVID-19. And there's a group which called National Acupuncture Detoxification Association. Okay, and this is a group of acupuncturists wherein they just focus on the use of 5 points in the ears. Okay? And with this, they in spite of the COVID crisis, they also take active role in the use of this acupuncture in the treatment of acupuncture and COVID, and also in the psychological problems associated with it. INAM is as an NGO which has been in existence for almost 40 years. They integrate traditional Filipino and Chinese medicine. Okay, and in this COVID crisis, this traditional medicine plays an important role in the medical mission. As you can see that they make use of Qigong. They make use of Qigong in the treatment. As you know, Qigong make use of the Qi and the breathing exercise. And COVID-19 is an infection of mainly of the pulmonary system. So Qigong, breathing exercise, they play a very important role in the treatment and in the recovery. So Qigong, in Qigong, it's a life energy cultivation. Okay? It's a kind of therapy that, which has been practicing in China for thousands of years and has been spread to different parts of the world, including our country. So this is a simple picture of how Qigong. And there are studies in prestigious medical journals showing the efficacy of Qigong in health in different diseases. And it's beneficial for a lot of medical conditions. Then acupuncture. Acupuncture is a treatment modality, a part of the traditional Chinese medicine, where needles are being inserted on specific parts of the body for the attainment of therapeutic results and also for the health maintenance. Okay? So it started dated back 3,000 years ago and spread to different parts of the country, to Asia, to Europe and North America and other countries, of course, including our country. Okay. So TCM recognized the vital energy, which is something which we call Qi. And so if there's an obstruction of the flow of Qi, then the disease will occur. As to how it started in the Philippines, there's really no good documentation as to how it started, but it must have started more than 100 years ago. It must have been brought to us, to our country, by the early Chinese migrants. At the beginning, the practice was limited only within the Chinese community. Now, in our country, I think it started in the official start will be way back in 1972, when a group of physicians were being invited by then First Lady Imelda Marcos to China to learn acupuncture. So after learning, they returned to our country to start to apply. Okay, and one of the first timers to go there is Dr. Palanca. Okay, Dr. Palanca is a faculty of cardiology in the University of Santo Tomas. Okay? And at this age of near almost 90 years old, he's still actively promoting acupuncture, okay, and doing teaching and also giving lectures in webinars. So in our very PTAC now, our PTAC also takes an active role in the promotion of acupuncture. Okay, so they come up also with the competency standard. Okay, so in other words, it becomes a kind of regulatory body on acupuncture. Okay? There's a national committee on accreditation of acupuncture, wherein acupuncturists and also acupuncture medical clinics and training centers have to undergo screening and also guidelines of the DOH. Okay? And now the PTAC is also aiming to include acupuncture in the field health. So if this will push through, then acupuncture can benefit more Filipino people. At present, we have acupuncture is a treatment modality actively being promoted by DOH, okay, and we have more than 1,000 accredited acupuncturists being accredited by PTAC, and we have seven government hospitals having acupuncture services, and
Dr.
three
Tan,
private hospitals. Yes.
you have we're running out of time. Can
Okay,
you
good.
please
Yeah,
wrap
so,
up?
okay, yeah, I'll make it fast. Okay, so you can see that acupuncture is gaining acceptance in the mainstream society in our country. So TCM acupuncture, a treasure and wisdom of Chinese culture, is being integrated in our daily life. TCM has been playing an important role in the bilateral relationship between Philippines and China in terms of cultural exchange. At academic level, TCM educations are being offered, okay, and also in medical missions. Okay? So TCM acupuncture is an important part of Bayanihan spirit between Philippines and China, Filipinos and Chinese, and Filipinos and China. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tan.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we go to our third speaker. A minor correction. Okay, I was just informed a few moments ago that one of our speakers will not be able to attend, right? And so because of that, we are making a few adjustments. Okay, So our next speaker, is Carmelea Angsi. She was the immediate past director of Bahay Chinoy, Museum of Chinese in Philippine Life, and the past president of the Chinese Filipino organization Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran. She teaches education courses under the College of Education at De La Salle University, Philippines. She's currently taking her doctoral studies at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, USA. Her work in the fields of culture and education spans 20 years and includes engagement with the public school sector and other museums around the country and abroad. She is a sought-after speaker on a myriad of topics ranging from history, culture, and the teaching profession. She volunteers as a trainer for Bagong Kulturang Pinoy and trains public school teachers around the country on teaching children how to read. Now, last summer, she undertook many training activities on handling online classes and preparing online content for virtual teaching. So with that, I'd like to invite Mea Angsi for her presentation.
Is my screen okay already, EG?
Yes, Mea.
Hi, good morning. I promise to make this short and sweet. Congratulations to PACS for 35 years. Thank you for inviting me to be one of your speakers. And I'd like to take this opportunity to humble brag a little bit. I think I've attended more PACS activities and events than PACS President Romel or Father Ari or Tina Clemente. Kasi I've been attending PACS since it started 35 years ago. I was a kid then. But syempre, back then, it was mostly utosan. Get this, get that by merienda. And so it's definitely an honor to have been promoted to speaker in the past few years. These are my topics. Don't be scared. They're not very long. They're not very heavy. I will keep to the time allotted. Okay, so we breached 3.5 million cases nationwide so far, with more than 50,000 active cases. But fortunately, the situation is improving with positivity rate below 2%. And even with NCR at alert level 1, our rates are going low, and there are talks now of alert level 0. So Dr. Tan already mentioned about that very early on, China was the first to send us a team of experts, plus equipment, plus PPEs. This was March 2020, a bit after our lockdowns began. Unfortunately, despite measures in place and the ramped up vaccination programs, our country is still lagging behind in the Bloomberg COVID-19 resilience ranking. We're still 50 out of 53 countries whose performance is measured based on our responses to the most recent coronavirus threats. Right now, I think they're calling it now the Delta Coron. Okay, behind the statistics though are the human cost of the pandemic, which claim the lives of the best and brightest doctors, nurses, other health workers. PACS deeply mourns the loss of Professor Eileen Baviera to COVID. She was past president and preeminent China historian. The Philippines have had the highest death rate of frontliners at the start of the pandemic. The number who got infected, the number who died of COVID are among the highest in the world. We are looking at 12,000 health workers as of November 2021, and more than 100 have died from COVID-19, especially in the early days. The frontliners who got the PPEs and the ventilators that Dr. Tan mentioned earlier, considered them really heaven sent. The inputs of medical experts were also very much appreciated. The Chinese doctors, what I'd like to emphasize is that the Chinese doctors 2020 gave such high praise to our Philippine doctors for their dedication and the way they were working under very, very challenging conditions, especially the lack of PPEs at that time. Filipino doctors just don't falter. We're just, we soldier on. Sadly, social media focus on the negative comments rather than the positive reactions to China. I'd like to rewind a bit to April 2020. Organizations like the China Red Cross, China companies in the Philippines, and Chinoy organizations were among the first to help the Philippine frontliners. We helped procure PPEs from China so that we have materials to distribute here. I'll be showing you our own PPE donation drive in a bit. So far, we no longer lack the vaccines. According to news reports, we have on hand enough vaccines for the entire population, but only 63 million are fully vaccinated up as of now. So we've not really reached the targeted herd immunity, except in populated areas like NCR and other major cities. In fact, and this is something that we all need to exert effort on, we have to backtrack and teach about COVID in the more rural areas. The farmers and bangka drivers that I work with in Laguna do not even believe in COVID. So our farmers are vaccinated simply because we required them, but they don't believe it. And others in the area also have the same sentiments about COVID. So of all the vaccines at the numbers that I'm showing now, 50 million were purchased from China, 5.1 million were donated by the Chinese government, totaling around 56 million doses. Deadlier than the virus, though, is the infodemic. False news, negative news, nasty comments that abound in social media and sometimes even in traditional media. So as mentioned, those in the more rural areas don't really believe in COVID. Fortunately, unfortunately, a lot of these negativity is in social media. But the thing is, if the rural areas don't have access to social media, their relatives in the more urban centers have only social media as sources of information. And these are the same relatives that unknowingly spread the wrong information. And so we see news reports like this or social media posts like this. What worsened the Filipinos' attitude against China as a source of the virus was the Philippine government's initial mishandling of the COVID situation. So up to the end of January 2020, Chinese tourists were still allowed to come in, especially for the Chinese New Year. In fact, chartered flights from Wuhan were suspended only on January 24, and some of the stranded tourists were eventually only flown home after special arrangements were made. So while the frontliners saw the vaccines and all of these material as gift supply, netizens and mainstream and social media fomented distrust of the vaccines from China. So this and the earlier slide are just samples of the negative comments on social media. Ignored mainly was the fact that Sinovac has been found to be highly effective by world experts. And so here, while a lot of Filipinos are protesting against Sinovac and vaccines from China, China at that time had already vaccinated more than 100 million people. What's clear to me here is that the scientific messaging is reaching us is unclear or sometimes wrong. In fact, in a conversation with a Chinoy immunologist, what she's sharing is that her and the other Philippine doctors are aware of the vaccination drives in China and Indonesia with mainly Sinovac and Sinopharm, and that they were working in those countries. But Sinovac was very slow in publishing their findings, which meant doctors could not immediately defend the vaccines, because our doctors here are of course required by medical and research protocol of the Philippine government. No, so they could not even use the news that China vaccines were safe and that by May 2021 China had already vaccinated around 500 million people they couldn't use that because they had to abide by the strictures of our own government requirements, which was, enough. And so the main message here is that, there are unclear messages coming in from various fronts. And so it was very difficult to really lay out that clean messaging from China. The following instances and events in the next slides are not COVID related at all, but that's with, anything quote unquote Chinese. We're all conflated. All the issues are conflated together. And so all of these involving the ethnic Chinese, they worsened or contributed to the worsening of the image of the ethnic Chinese community that the Filipino general public had in their minds. Many Filipinos resented Duterte's pivot to China, especially that time when he jokingly claimed that the Philippines was a province of China. So add to that when traditional and social media picked up on horrible behavior manifested by Chinese nationals. So we at Kaisa have tried to speak out that, bad behavior has nothing to do with ethnicity, that we do need to call out people when they are uncivilized. And to reiterate, behavior has nothing to do with the culture that people come from. But of course, for the general public, unfortunately, all Chinese look alike. And so, when the Chinese nationals, especially those in the Pogo industry, advertise illegal services, the Chinoys get lumped together with them. Unfortunately, like all types of citizens, Chinese nationals run the spectrum. You have Chinese nationals who are perpetrators, but also many who are victims. And so while police are busy monitoring and imposing health protocols, crimes against Chinese nationals have risen. It's partially racial, partially social, and that's very unfortunate. No, and they are not getting the Chinese national, those who are the victims, aren't getting the assistance that they needed. While all ethnic Chinese, unfortunately are lumped together in the minds of the general public, Chinoys themselves have to take the effort to call out illegal activities and undesirable behavior. On top of the examples of misbehavior, one early example of really bad behavior, which angered everybody, including Chinoys, was how Chinese nationals, a number of them Pogo workers, were jumping the lines during the early vaccination drives, or during the early days of the vaccination drive in 2021. We saw that in social media, Viber, WeChat. They'd pay bribes to do that and circumvent protocol. They pay doctors to make fake medical certificates. So, we're still very fortunate that in our country, we're so very tolerant that these things did not get super blown out of proportion and there were no violent racist incidents. So as much as the concept is that all Chinese look alike, the Chinoy community worked double time to help address the needs of the nation. But then this has been a trademark of the Chinoy community since forever ago. So pardon the plugging of our own organization, of course, Kaisa, through its social development projects like the Kaisa Contra Corona, has been delivering much needed medical supplies to hospitals and other institutions up to now. That's so sad, no? Just last week, we sent PPE sets for the guards at the Bilibid prison. On top of its own Kaisa Contra Corona project, we partnered with the Towns Foundation and the UP Medical Foundation to distribute PPEs nationwide. So this was March 2020 until around August 2020. When the project ended, more than 1.6 million PPE sets were distributed to 650 institutions nationwide, amounting to around 200 million pesos in cash and kind. Kaisa volunteers also went directly to communities and hospitals to deliver PPEs and relief packs. I take this opportunity to thank and honor our staff and volunteers who did such an amazing job in very restrictive conditions. So do follow us. Later, I'll be posting our social media accounts. Please follow us to see more details on where donated goods were sent. Food is always a necessity. We all know that. And so Kaisa distributed food packs to various communities across NCR and nearby communities as well. Earlier on in the pandemic, when farmers were also in dire straits because no one was buying produce, we were able to do rescue buys. So we buy a truckload and deliver those directly to various communities in need. When Kaisa distributed, so I special mention this, we distributed rice to jeepney drivers in Quezon City, the UP Ikot and UP Katipunan route. And the drivers there were super grateful, and they were saying, you know, we don't know you, you don't know us, but you're giving us food. The government keeps promising ayuda, but we haven't seen anything up to now. And this is so symbolic, or really testament to the gap that the Chinoy community organizations are filling. So on top of PPEs and relief packs, Chinoy organizations gave away anti-COVID medicine, both for cure and prophylaxis. I like this picture in the middle. It's funny, yes, but it's Lianhua Qingwen capsules, granules, capsules, Arbidol capsules for pneumonia, COVID pneumonia, herbs and tea for lung detox. Many Filipino friends who were willing to take them loved how much the herbs helped them into move on to full recovery. Syempre, humble brag, senators, congressmen, university heads, they were asking Kaisa for these herbal remedies. Thank you, of course, to other Chinoy organizations who acquired these from China and then allotted some to Kaisa for distribution. In many hospitals in China, the herbs are actually boiled the whole day, and frontliners and patients just drink them like water to boost their immune system and cleanse their organs. Special mention to Chuchi Foundation that went all out to help ease life during the pandemic. Hospitals received high oxygen flow machines, oxygen concentrators, full PPE sets, relief packs for the marginalized, taxi drivers, jeepney drivers, tricycle drivers, and even salon workers. After Typhoon Odette, Chuchi Foundation was going to distribute cash aid, as is their trademark, on Sunday. So the banks opened to accommodate them on a Saturday, and then the bank staff even volunteered for their distribution the next day. So this is very commendable. You know, when you do volunteer work, people will just come and help you out. One of the more significant projects of Chuchi was the vaccination drive for Quezon City. They vaccinated more than 100,000 people. I like their vaccination drive for children because they had costumes and freebies. So how come there's no popcorn and ice cream for adult vaccination drives, no? I also want popcorn and ice cream. So daya. Just because there's COVID doesn't mean that Kaisa's other work stops. Disasters hit. Life outside COVID still happens. And because our social media presence increased during the pandemic, so did requests for medical assistance and food assistance. These are some of the communities that we gave food and rice to, on top of the jeepney driver community in the UP area. Special mention to our partners in Lila, Filipina, because we were able to provide food aid for female senior citizens in Rojas City. Kaisa also continued our annual outreach visit to the Aita community in Tarlac. This is an annual Christmas visit in partnership with Parkway Love Fellowship and with Kaisa volunteers. Kaisa's outreach extends to to educational assistance as well. Orphans of the drug war have no way of going back to school. So during the pandemic, we helped them with before pandemic and during pandemic, we helped them with funds for food mainly so that they can continue going to school. So if you want to help out this project, we can help put you in touch directly with Acupuncture and the CBOL program. In terms of education, which is not really Kaisa's forte, there are other organizations which have been doing this for far longer. Among them is Chinese Filipino Business Club, Charity First, the Federation, and many other organizations who have set up scholarship. Many of these students have graduated with honors, and some have managed to top board examinations. these scholars will forever remember that theirs and their families' lives exchanged because of the help of the Chinoy organizations. In a different kind of education, to Chuchi Foundation gives training for caregivers in Taiwan, and the trainees get paid while undergoing training, and they have a chance to continue their studies toward a bachelor's degree. But undercurrents of racism will often surface during times of crisis like the pandemic, and especially during economic difficulties brought about by the pandemic, inflation, disasters, displacement. The anti-China narrative was exacerbated during these 2 years by infodemic, the mistrust, bad experiences, and in many instances, deliberate stoking of anti-Chinese fires. At the end of the day, this is our message. No place is too far, no task is too difficult for Chinoys when the need arises. We're often among the first, if not the first, to reach far-flung communities by plane, bangka, motorcycle, boat, helicopter, C-130, tricycle, mountain bike, four-wheel drive, any of the above. We are integral parts of the nation, and we will do everything in our power to do it right. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on our socials to reach out on how to help our partners. Oh, sorry, wait, I forgot something. Yeah, all right. Do follow us on our socials, and thank you for listening.
Okay, so thank you, Maya, for that for your presentation. No? So now we have time to accept a few questions for our panel. Okay, so allow me to just fix the position of our speakers. Okay, there. Okay, so we now move to the open forum, and I think we already have a few questions in line. Okay, so I think our first question is for Dr. Lina Gong. Thank you very much, Lina, for your excellent presentation. This is a question from Dr. Banlawi. Do you think that China is pursuing disaster diplomacy towards the Philippines as part of its soft power diplomacy to increase its political influence, especially within the context of the West Philippine Sea dispute?
Thank you for your question. First of all, I'm not the expert of China-Philippine relations, so I can only answer this question from the perspective of disaster cooperation. In my view, as other instruments or means of in diplomacy, disaster cooperation is definitely one of the tools that governments can use to for various purposes. I believe that there are multiple motivations behind the country's decision to make a contribution or provide aid to another country. Usually it can be a humanitarian one, can be, of course, political consideration, economic consideration. So I would say the reason or the factors driving China's aid program or projects in this region or in any specific country is a mix of a few. So I believe improving its image in the Philippines, in the region and globally is definitely one of them. and whether or how this can affect the overall bilateral relations, I would say it depends, and it's not likely that if we provide aid to another country and then it can significantly change the impression or the image of the aid providing country. So I would say it's one to improve image, definitely, but whether it's related to other agenda or other components of the bilateral relations, I would not make that or come to that conclusion from my perspective. Thank you.
Maybe just to have a follow-up on that question. In your study, Doctor, were you able to find if using such disaster relief instruments actually does help somehow improve or change the minds of not just governments but more specifically citizens? Because I think that would be the real target, right? The citizenry.
Thank you for the follow-up question. In my view, I agree with your observation. Actually, the statement or the position of the government is one thing, but actually the response or the impression of the whole society actually is not always consistent with the government position. So it's not easy to improve a state's image through just one time of response or one type of interaction. That's why I find it in my study, I find it very important that you have multiple channels of engagement, and you have a diversity of actors engaging in this channel, in this area. And you need to make long-term investment. By investment, I mean commitment, rather than like one-off thing, like when disaster strikes, you provide aid, and after that, I believe communication is very important. Like it's also very important that how you provide the assistance, how you communicate, or the two sides communicate with each other. And one thing I observe is how you whether the offer of assistance actually match the needs of the receiving country and match the needs on the ground. So I believe it's a long-term effort that needs to be cultivated. But yeah, so that's my response. Thank you.
Thank
EG,
you.
can I add?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Oo. I agree with Dr. Kong that we need, this is long term, and part of it, to establish that people to people relation, and to smoothen out relations and the communications, we need to show our faces. I encourage everyone to, the Chinoy organizations have already have a tradition of doing outreach and development projects. What we'd like to encourage now is that we show our faces and make our voices heard at these projects, rather than just the usual donating cash or dumping of goods at a local government unit. You know, we are often, some of them will claim credit, but the thing is, when Chinoy volunteers from all of these different organizations show their faces, the fair complexion, singkit eyes, monosyllabic surname, these move us further in establishing that long-lasting bridge of love and understanding. One of my most favorite stories was when our kaisa past president in Iloilo, everyone thought, oh, and Baldwin is here, everyone thought they were Korean. So they were there. We are a Chinoy organization. We were distributing aid for Yolanda, 2014. The people there were talking, it was in Cebu, they were talking in Bisaya, and they were talking, oh, we have Korean donors. And then Gani went up on stage and started, he's very Chinese looking, and then started speaking Bisaya, and everybody was stunned. And this went such a long way in identifying the Chinoy community and establishing that link that we are Filipinos, we're one with you. We just look different.
Okay. So I guess we have now a question coming from one of our speakers. Dr. Lina Kong has a question which I guess Maya and Dr. Tan will be able to answer. So how is China-Philippine engagement now different from 10 years ago? So what were the changes, increased exchanges, or diversity of actors involved? Maybe Maya can start and then Dr. Tan can follow.
I am encouraged by how Chinoys, the young generation, really take this country to heart. No, we've seen this. Okay, it's election season. If you look at newspapers from 1992 presidential elections, so 1992, all the presidential elections, what I've seen is that there's less and less blatant anti-Chinese sentiments. 1992, where you'll have posters, billboards in Welcome Rotonda saying the Chinese should just go back to China. And then boycott Chinese candidates, Chinese name candidates, something like that. This campaign period, there's virtually none. How did that happen? It's because the Chinoys are now embedded, and as much as Chinoys insist that we are Filipinos and we're part of the country, if the general public does not accept that, it's never going to happen. But because of this sample where we now no longer see these, Chinese go back to China, very, very rarely now see this, then we're validated that the Chinoys are now part and parcel of the country. And we are now accepted as citizens. And people in public, when there are very blatant anti-Chinese sentiments on social media, we no longer stand alone in defending ourselves. We now have an entire roster of academics and even influencers speaking up on our behalf to differentiate, let's say, an economic issue from a racial issue, things like that, right? And so this is the work of the younger generation who really go out there and put a face to the Chinoy and ensure that they are recognized, that we are recognized as Philippine citizens and members of this country.
Okay. Dr. Tan, your thought on how China-Philippine engagement now was very different from 10 years ago?
Yeah, I can recall that when I was young, okay, during political gathering as a part of the campaign is to be anti-Chinese, okay? Whoever candidate will have the strongest anti-Chinese ideology, then that will be a good point for him, okay? But nowadays, I agree with what Mia has just said, that this is no longer happening. However, I think what the Chinoys can do is that many of the actually in Chino communities there are many kind-hearted organizations and many kind-hearted people who are contributing money for the welfare of our country, for the Philippines and for the Filipino people. However, the main problem is that they don't actually do them personally. Okay, they just contribute money. Okay, so they say they contribute money, and then for some government officials to do that. So in this case, the public doesn't see the involvement of the Chinoys. So I think one important thing is now is to encourage Chinoy not only to pour out money, but also to be fiscally be involved. Okay, be involved in the work. So, it's very easy to give money. I just give out money and that's all. My business is done. However, we have to learn how to invite people to really help us to be involved, to make use of the money so that the public, the Filipino people will feel the Chinoy is really doing something. Okay. So I think that's important. And also maybe the Chinoy and also we can also work together with the new migrants from China. Okay, many of them, even though they are still Chinese in citizenship, but they learn to love the Philippines. So we can encourage them, help them to work for our country.
Okay, so maybe just to somehow follow up, no, because based on the sharing, it's there's usually this whole question that whenever issues become racial, right, is that Chinese communities or local Chinese communities tend to be caught in the middle of things, right? And so I've noticed, no, that normally Chinoys or people of ethnic Chinese background tend to distance, right? There is some distancing wherein we are the locals and then they are the mainlanders, if you would, no. But in doing so, right, how do Chinoys distinguish themselves from their mainland or foreign Chinese counterparts without themselves becoming racist towards them? I think this is something that I think all of our speakers can somehow respond to, being part of ethnic Chinese communities around Southeast Asia. So anyone can start, no? Yes,
But I like
yes,
to
yes,
say,
yes, please,
yes,
Dr.
I
Tan.
think, it's really, there's really a cultural difference. Okay, the Chinoys who have been here in the past 10, 20, or many of us were born here, and the mainlanders who just came from China. Okay, the cultural difference is there's really a great cultural difference. What is important is that both parties, the mainlanders and also the Chinoys, there should be a correct frame of mind that there should be no discrimination between the two. Okay? There should be there should be mutual accommodation, okay, and better understanding. I think with this frame of mind, I think we can lessen the gap, and of course, we also maybe one thing that the Chinoys can do is also to organize, let's say, webinars or seminars to familiarize the mainlanders, the newcomers, the culture, the Filipino culture, the rules and regulations, the laws in our country. That can lessen lessen the problems. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Lina Kong, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I find it very important as we have seen a growing number of Chinese citizens coming or going overseas to work, to live, and to study. So in my view, it is very important to accept diversity and respect and accept diversity and differences and respect each other's position. So as for how local or like Chinoys or overseas Chinese communities can help the new migrants, I guess in many ways. On the one hand, it is very important to make it clear or like during daily communication is that there are cultural connections, but on the other hand, there are also differences. So I believe it's important for both ends to accept the fact that there are connections culturally, historically, but there are also differences. So communication is important, either both at like the state level, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of providing disaster assistance and all that. Well, at individual level, I believe the way how the message is communicated is also important. Yeah.
Okay. And then Maya?
Um, I think it's both or all of the above, a generational issue, a sociological issue, as well as a racial issue. So the older generation, um, if you're familiar with Chinoy organizations, a lot of the members now, a lot of the new members in those organizations are Chinese nationals who are here for businesses. Why? Because the younger generation Chinoys um, are not because we now get protection from other because we now get protection from other networks. So you have Filipino associations, let's say for accountants or for lawyers or for engineers. And if you are a professional rather than a business owner, you'll be there, not in the family association, not in the clan association, right? Or not in the hometown association, because you no longer need those connections or protections. So that's a generational thing. And then when for the business owners, they also belong to other bigger business associations, not just the Chinoy organizations, right? So that's one. Secondly, um, in social media, the only things that we see are the bad things. That's the negative of social media. Uh, Bad behavior gets blown out of proportion, not just for the Chinese nationals, but for anyone, right? Everything bad is just blown out of proportion when you have social media. But and then Philippines is the social media capital of the world. So good luck with that, right? So you have a few bad eggs, they get blown out of proportion, and then so the Chinoys, especially the younger generation, really would like to distance ourselves from that. As I mentioned in my talk, there is still a significant part of the population who just lump all the Chinese together, right? And so it doesn't matter whether you are a Chinese citizen or a Filipino citizen, all Chinese look alike, right? And so that is so difficult, and so a lot of the Chinoys will move towards that na, oy, I'm not like them, I'm not them, and we will emphasize our differences on how we're different from them, no? But at Kaisa, we do, and at the Movement for Restoration of Peace and Order, we do our own little ways on helping I mentioned earlier, no, that the Chinese nationals can be victims of crime. And so we have that network of helping them on a more formal level, where for example, we spend time, effort, resources on coordinating between the NBI, the PNP, and then the Chinese police on, because the problem here, EG, is in a lot of these instances, it's Chinese nationals victimizing Chinese nationals, but on Philippine land.
Mhm.
And so on paper, this is actually a China issue, not a Philippine issue. There are no charges that can be filed here in the Philippines. It has to be done in China. And then sometimes, it's a whole thing, and it's very confusing, and it's also very nuanced. And and sometimes our hands are tied by our laws and what we can do, what services we can provide to Chinese nationals.
Okay. Thank you. Then we have a question here for Dr. Lina Gong. In what ways does China's disaster diplomacy serve the BRI? In your study, did you happen to come across data showing that BRI participating countries receive more humanitarian or disaster-related assistance flows compared to non-BRI countries?
I guess there are a few clarifications to make here. So first of all, actually, last year I did a research project on this topic, actually BRI and China's humanitarian action, and it's published as a policy report, publicly available online. So first of all, the BRI actually is a developmental initiative, and officially, it's not having a humanitarian component. So the priority or the focus is on developmental issues, trade issues. However, there is a linkage in my observation between BRI on the one hand and China's humanitarian action on the other hand, is that China's official position on its foreign aid is that, as stated in its recent official documents, a primary purpose or aim of its foreign aid is to serve or facilitate the rollout or the development of BRI. So I would say they are related, and BRI countries are the priorities or will be prioritized in China's aid provision. However, when it comes to specific cases or a crisis, we will see differentiation, and the decision to whether to make to make large scale of assistance, it depends on the level or the seriousness or severity of the crisis. The relations between the accepting or the affected country with China is of course a consideration. However, one difference I assume we can observe nowadays is that previously the decision may be more influenced by geopolitical calculation, but nowadays we'll see maybe a different approach. While geopolitical consideration is one factor, however, there are also other factors like the image issue or at the role or the sense of responsibility as a emerging donor or a major country or power in the region. So I would say they are related. However, BRI does not have a humanitarian component, although there are always calls for BRI to include or include a humanitarian component or for China to contribute more. We have seen a lot of such calls, like from the president of ICRC. He made these kind of comments a few times. So in terms of data or statistics, I'm still in the process of collecting, so we can see more clearly like whether there is actually a difference between BRI and non-BRI countries. Another issue is that who are the BRI countries? Because you can be BRI countries along the countries along the route of the BRI, or you can be BRI partner countries. So it really depends on how you define it.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a question here. I think this is still for Dr. Lina Gong. Even though China's engagement in the periphery sometimes fosters skepticism and is seen as an opportunity, does Cambodia's chairmanship in ASEAN and its strong strategic relations with China affect the vision and direction of ASEAN?
as I mentioned earlier, I focus primarily on disaster management. So I will not be able to see the whole picture, for example, about economic engagement or political issues, security issues. I'm not so familiar with those areas. However, from my engagement in the discussion on disaster management cooperation, I would say, first of all, ASEAN is based on consensus, adopt a consensus-based approach to decision making. It's not easy, or it's not likely that one country can like significantly influence or decide the path this regional organization is going to take, or the vision setting. I would say actually it's the other way around. ASEAN countries discuss like what's their needs will be, what their for example, in the area of disaster management, what are their priorities? And then they engage with different partners. And then like, the decision will be made on how the cooperation will be shaped, or will be like, rather than like external parties can influence significantly like ASEAN's decision. So that's how I will see this dynamic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, and then we have a question here. Do you think that the level of friendliness of a sitting, well, in this case, Philippine president, is a big variable on the degree of response of the Chinese government in disaster relief? I think this could be applicable to all speakers, since it would go into the theme of like, again, looking at the geopolitics of it, right? And the question is being asked because because I think that during the Yolanda issue back during the Aquino presidency, which was not as warm towards China, the approach was quite different, maybe in terms of Chinese humanitarian aid. So is it a factor, the closeness or the friendliness of a country as far as China's willingness to provide humanitarian aid is concerned? Maybe we could start with Dr. Lina Kong, since it's very much related to your area.
Yes, sure. In my according to my observation, I agree that domestic politics of both aid providing countries and receiving countries matters to aid provision. However, as the question suggests, it can be, or previous discussion suggested, when there are challenges, there are also opportunities. So it really depends on how you see it. So I agree that in Yolanda, the dynamic was quite, during Yolanda, the dynamics was very different from now. However, in my opinion, whether there are established channels of communication, how the working relations at a lower level also matter. So if there are channels of communication and you can, the two sides can decide like the path forward, it can also help. So domestic politics is one factor that will influence the age or the age provision. However, other factors can also influence whether aid is provided, how it is provided, and the size of aid provision. So I would say domestic politics matter. However, other factors like whether there are established mechanism and channels for communication and the working relations at the senior official levels also matter.
Our other speakers, do you have any thoughts on this? Maya, maybe based on your experience.
I think it's the thing is the Aquino administration and the Duterte administration were polar opposites, right, in terms of relating with China. It's very hard, I think, for heads of state to find that middle balance where at Kaisa we always say that there has to be a balance where we stand up for the sovereign rights of the country, but do not use that issue alone as our foot forward. There are a myriad political and sociological issues where we can work together. So without compromising that, without compromising our sovereign rights, so in that sense, what I've seen in the past two administrations was a binary formula where it was an either or proposition. It shouldn't be that way. There's always a political middle ground. I mean, other Southeast Asian countries are doing it, where the stance on the sovereign rights is for the country, but then in other areas of in other areas there's cooperation, in the medical field, in the health field, in environment, in other parts of, let's say, business enterprises. There are so many pockets where we can cooperate with China but still maintain our sovereign stance.
Okay. Dr. Tan, would you like to add anything to that regarding the importance of the relationship as a basis for support?
I have no further comment, but I agree with the views of Mia.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then we have a question here for Dr. Kong. You mentioned the importance of localization in disaster response. How is China doing this, especially in Southeast Asia?
As I mentioned earlier, localization is an important trend of disaster response and humanitarian action in Southeast Asia, at the global level. They started mentioning or emphasizing this in 2016 during the Global Humanitarian Summit. And how to practice this or how to implement this, as I mentioned in my presentation, one challenge I see in China's diplomacy or disaster diplomacy is that China doesn't have a very strong civil society at home, and not to mention, like, for those civil society groups to operate overseas, it takes time to grow these parts or this group of actors. Well, on the other hand, I can see that in some cases, the businesses operating in Southeast Asia or in other countries are taking some of these humanitarian responsibilities, as I believe our colleagues here will know more, like how this works in the Philippines, how the Chinese based and not Chinese based, Chinese enterprises can contribute, or maybe our colleagues here can provide share their views on how the Chinese enterprises can improve or strengthen their contribution through people-to-people communication channels. And one example I would say, or I observe, is that during the double disasters of tsunami and earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia in 2018, so a group of Chinese volunteer groups went to Jakarta, maybe 2 or 1 or 2 days after the country started to accept international aid. However, one challenge they found was that they need to register and they need to have access or local government's approval to get access to the affected communities. So without a local partner, it's very difficult and it takes a lot of time. When you finish all these processes and all that, you may already pass the golden time for giving relief and all that. So it is very important to have local partners, and these kind of partnership you cannot build on the scene or after the disaster started. So it need to be cultivated long before, and then you have regular exchanges rather than you exchange contact information and stop communication afterwards. So I believe it's a long-term effort to make. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And then I think there's, I guess, somewhat of a follow-up here, given the idea of localization. Does China have a general strategy with regard to its disaster diplomacy, or is it really more of a case-to-case basis depending on the country and the region and all those other factors?
I would say there is, as I mentioned, in the trends of China's foreign aid earlier, like they focus on natural hazards over conflict settings. Although they partner with the UN in project implementation, state-to-state channel remains the primary channel. Respecting the sovereignty of the affected country, of course, is the primary principle underlining their engagement. And apart from that, we see some latest development, as I mentioned. They started to engage in refugee issues more. We can see Chinese businesses became more active in some cases. We have seen some Chinese civil societies groups or volunteers coming out, but it's still not comparable with major donors. So yeah.
Okay. And then I think a question for Maya, and also possibly Dr. Tan. We do understand that most of the time when we think of Chinese diplomacy, right, and China's acceptability, it's normally because there are certain actors who actively promote China, okay, and likewise negative negative imagery because of the other side, right? But is it also possible that actors who are very or over or are who are promoting China too much are also detrimental to China's efforts of image building? So maybe just to cite a case, let's say it's the idea of having, let's say, high-ranking officials who are hard selling, if you would, no, hard selling China to the local population. Does it have any detrimental effect? Maya, I think would, and later Dr. Tan.
Sorry. Yeah. I guess it will always depend on the current political climate, right? Nothing happens just there in a microcosm. It is always dependent on the, not even just the political climate, but sometimes even the economic climate. So here, the general public still believe, we've been debunking this for the past 30 years, but the general public, a lot of people still believe that the Chinese control the economy, right? So 30 years of debunking is, making headway, but not yet there. And if that's the case, and then something went wrong, something goes wrong with the economy, then it becomes a racial issue. So now you have a climate where it's an economic slump. The Chinese are generally being blamed, and then you have um, a government or maybe politicians or even officials who are extremely pro-China, and that will clash. That will clash, and so on the ground, the young Filipinos, the non-academics will not see the differences. And these are the young, and remember, I keep repeating this, that we're the social media capital. And so these the non-academics will take all of these at face value and make non-informed or ill-informed conclusions and spread it. Right? TikTok is very popular now. And so the thing is, if your only source of information is social media or TikTok, and then these are the young people that are spreading the news, whether correctly or wrongly, and that's the only thing that you get, things snowball very fast into something very negative. On the flip side, if your political climate, if for example, especially during the Aquino administration in 2012, where we filed those charges for the UNCLOS, and then you have China aid coming in, then the view will be, oh, they're trying to soften our stance. They're trying to, the unfortunate thing is that academic positions and well-informed positions are very difficult to spread, because as academics we're not using the trendy, we're not using the young people tools. And so it's a very, I guess my point is, it's a very difficult balance. How do you spread the word? How do you spread that balance for people to actually look at issues and study issues rather than just taking like accepting a TikTok video as like the gospel? Not sure I
Okay.
answered that question correctly, but
Okay. Dr. Tan, your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I think the image of China in our community, in our country, is really not that good. Okay, and I think one important reason is that the media plays a very important role. Okay, a lot of smearing and negative fake news about it. Okay, so I think that Chinese government has to exert more effort, as suggested by Maya, about try to make use of the proper forum or fora or media way, like the TikTok and other means to explain the side of the China side, and also to explain and also to rectify whatever false information.
Okay. So thank you to our three speakers. It's already 11:58. We are running out of time. But we would like to thank Dr. Lina Gong, Dr. Tan Chiong, and of course Ms. Maya Angsi for their insights about Philippine-China relations in times of crisis. I think one of the key ideas here, which was highlighted, maybe subtly, really, is the importance of not just people but really NGOs, right? And that it is through those types of engagement wherein a lot of image building, I guess, can come into play, not just with regard to doling out money and doling out aid, but more importantly, so that through these groups and through people, again, certain forms of aid, may they be humanitarian, may be disaster, can reach the right people at the right time, and that this is not something that happens during the crisis, right? This is something that takes time. It has to be cultivated continuously, right? Which I guess somehow helps organizations like ours to to continue, right? Because we are essential. Okay, so with that, thank you again, everyone, for coming to panel number 3 of PACS at 35, the panel on Philippines-China relations in times of crisis. We would like to invite everyone again for next Saturday's panel, which will be on, which is a panel on Chinese studies in the Philippines, founders' reflections after 35 years of PACS. So it's a bit more intimate. The format will be a bit different. Okay, of course, and our speakers, you are more than welcome to join us as well. So I actually forgot to introduce myself earlier. This is EG Dizon, and on behalf of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies, thank you for coming and have a nice day.
Thank you, EG,
Thank
for this
you.
wonderful moderation.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.